Well, welcome back to the 55 Buick build. It's been a little while because there are too many things to do and not enough time. So I had to step away from the 55 for a couple weeks, get back onto it now shortly, hopefully. As you saw in the last video, I bought the 41 Buick, and I am to the point, being a hoarder, that if I buy another car, I gotta sell a car. I got too many cars. So it's time to say goodbye to my 1948 Cadillac. Here is my 1948 Cadillac, which I really hate selling because I like it, but got to get rid of something, so this one goes. This is a 1948 Cadillac Model 75. Amazingly solid, original car. Extended wheelbase, Fleetwood, big car. Big car. If you had money in 48, you got this. And inside, make sure my door clears the fender there. You see pearl steering wheel, still in amazing condition for 1948. Just nuts. And you also see power window switches. Yeah, and they work. It's the craziest thing. It's a hydraulic over, or electric over hydraulic. The switch is electric. That runs a little motor and a pump and pushes hydraulic fluid through lines that run through the car and move the mechanisms up and down. Unfortunately, I didn't get to take the door panels off to see how it all works, but it works, and it works really neat. It's pretty cool. And original flathead V8, runs great. Pretty cool car. Pretty cool car. Other than having no brakes from sitting, pretty nuts. This thing runs and drives. The seats also power too. Again, hydraulic. Close that door slope. And what's cool on these old ones, still has suicide doors, which is cool. A lot of room in the back. Got your own footrest. Got the clock set to 2 minutes to midnight, which I didn't do, but I would have done if it were my car. And just a cool car. But you notice it's already on a trailer. It's already sold. It's sold as soon as I listed it. So tomorrow morning I have to deliver this, and then I think we'll be back on the 55. Okay, finally I have a few hours to get some work done on this car. Although work called me this morning and I got called into work, so it is what it is. Anyway, so next steps I'm gonna do on this car is take the front end apart, take the front suspension apart, rebuild it, somewhat paint it, not going nuts, not doing a restoration. I have to keep reminding myself, but we're gonna make it safe and good to drive. So this front end is actually in really good shape. Control arm bushings are good, upper and lower, no need to mess with those. It's gonna need ball joints, and that's about it. I mean, even the calipers are recent, the pads are recent, rotors are recent. Hoses look fine. I have new ones, but this was off a running car. I don't see an issue with those. Even the tie rod ends are good and tight. Wiggle those. There's no play in them, so they're good, so I don't have to replace those. So time to get going on it. First steps I'm going to do is remove the steering rack, get that unbolted. It's just the tie rod ends, and then the rack has 3 mounting points, 2 on the one side, and then 1 under here on the passenger side. One thing I will be doing with this steering rack is replacing the bushings with polyurethane. These Jaguar racks use rubber bushings, and Jaguar engines leak oil, and the oil gets to the bushings, and the bushings start degrading. And what that does is when the steering shaft is moving, it'll let the rack actually move. I don't know how much deflection this one has right now. If I can get a picture of that bushing. Doesn't look like much, but it is a little bit of wiggle in it. I saw when I had to wait all the way down on the car. So those bushings are coming out. I'm going to put polyurethane in there, and we'll go from there. All right, let me get this thing apart. All right, Caliper is removed, first step. Did not have to take my steering arm off of the tie rod end. Forgot it all bolts together. The caliper bolts in with the steering arm to the spindle. And no, you don't have to remove the caliper to replace your pads. Those are quick release type pads. Here's a look at a caliper. 4-piston. They work great. And the pads are really easy to remove. You just pull a couple pins, slide them out, the pads fall right out. So the only time the caliper comes off is if you're going to replace it. So it's not just on with easily. It's, like I said, 3 bolts to the steering arm, to the steering arm, two to the steering arm, and 1 up in the front there behind that bracket. And I mentioned earlier about the shims that go between the steering arm and the spindle, but we'll revisit that during assembly. All right, so caliper's off. Rack will come off next. All right, steering rack is out. 3 bolts. Here you can see the mounts. 2 on the driver's side, 1 on the passenger side, and those are the bushings I'm going to have to take out and replace. All right, so with the rack out, next thing is going to be spindles. And I said, things are in such good shape, I don't have to remove the rotors or anything. I'm just going to take the spindles right off so I can do the ball joints, get that done. So we're going to do the top first, just a 3/4 nut. Take the nut off, and then since I don't care about these ball joints, use a pickle fork. Man, I can't speak this morning. Use a pickle fork to separate them. If I cared about them, I would do it a different method. Probably have to put the spring back in to get pressure on it, and then you beat on the spindle here and it would separate. But not once have I taken one of these apart and had to, or not had to replace ball joints. So pickle fork it is. All right, got the 3/4 inch nut removed and basically just spun back on a few threads. Just so when this separates, the spindle doesn't come crashing down. I do it that way whether the spring's in there or not. It just keeps things from getting hurt. Especially since I'm doing this with one hand, if I can video it. But here's your standard pickle fork for those who haven't used one. It's just a beating tool. All right, so it's going to fit in between the ball joint and the spindle like that. And the reason you don't do this on a ball joint you care about is you are going to tear the boot, guaranteed. So unless the boot is replaceable and you want to replace the boot, don't do it this way. You will cut the boot. So now I'm just going to put the hammer to it and beat on it, and it's going to separate. Can I do this with one hand? Well, I don't know. Let's see. Maybe. Maybe not. Goes. Oh, no, it didn't. Looks like it's going to be a 2-hander because I got to hold this thing steady. Nope, couldn't do it with one hand, but it came apart real easy with 2 hands. So this method is the same whether there's springs in there or not. It's actually easier with the spring installed because it puts pressure on the control arms, but with the nut on there, a few threads, broke it loose, spindle came down. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. I'm going to leave the top attached, loosen the bottom nut, and just have it on a few threads so it's safe. Because again, when you separate this, you don't want it all flying apart, especially if the spring is in here. If you're doing this and the coil spring is still in here, I suggest putting a chain through the coil spring just as another safety factor. Just in case you didn't thread that nut on enough and it lets loose, you don't want to get hurt. Coil springs are nothing to mess with. They will really mess you up. So I'm lucky in this situation where I don't have a coil spring in there, so it's not going to kill me, but it is going to be a little harder to separate because there is no pressure on the control arm from the spring. So now I'm going to put the pickle fork in between the lower control arm and the spindle and knock that apart. All right, spindle is off and on the ground. I had to unbolt the dust shield to get enough room for the fork to get in there. It's only a couple 10mm nuts. That comes right off. And I have my spring plate unbolted as well. That bolts into the bottom of the control arm. So for the ball joint on the lower, you can see, unlike GM, if you're familiar with that kind of stuff, the ball joint is actually bolted to the spindle and not the control arm. And the boot was already torn on this, so I knew it was going to be junk. But quick way you can check ball joints. Really, I mean, if it's loosey-goosey, it's no good. But if there's any kind of an up and down movement in it, it really shouldn't be any. It should be tight. And this has got up and down wear in it, so they're cheap. Gonna replace it. And as far as the upper ball joint bolts into the control arm. I'm just gonna take the control arm right off. That way it's easier to clean it up and replace that ball joint. All right, one other thing I'm gonna do now that the upper control arms are off, front suspension stripped. While I'm here, I gotta clean up this area for my air conditioning compressor clearance. You remember I had cut this and it was real tight. I'm just gonna get rid of this mount because I don't need it, and kind of level this off and make a flat plate across the top to reinforce this steering rack mount. But I don't need any of this, and that'll just give me even extra clearance for the AC compressor. So that'll be the next thing. All right, everything is cleared up, cleaned up. Impossible for me to video it. It's so tight inside this engine compartment. Standing in here, and I really have no way to mount the camera where sparks won't be nailing it from every direction. So I just rough cut that off with the plasma, cleaned it up a little bit with the grinder. And see, I just leveled off the steering rack mount, and I'll just make a plate across the top of this to tie it into the cross member, just for extra reinforcement. And this side I'm just going to leave as is. It's not interfering with anything. I really don't need to get rid of anything. I'll leave this all here to support that steering rack mount. So I think that'll be the last thing I can get done before I have to go into work. So that may be the end of this video. And on the next ones, we'll be getting into disassembly of the front suspension parts and the rebuild, cleaning this up and painting it, and you know, that kind of stuff. Thanks for following along. Sorry it's taken long to get between videos. It's just too much to do, and hopefully we'll get rolling along a little quicker. See ya.